All right, I think we're recording. I think we're good. All right, this is Level Up Your Development Experience with Lando. All these monitors here. My name is Aaronfeledy. I own a essentially one-man Drupal shop where I do mostly development and consulting for all sorts of different businesses. Essentially, if they need an extra Drupal developer on their team, I'll come supplement them. Or if they don't know a lot of Drupal, their team has a Drupal site to work on, doesn't have the advanced knowledge, I'll come in and work with them. And yeah, I'm here today to talk about Lando. No, not that Lando, the new Lando. No, not that new Lando. This new Lando. It's actually not so new anymore. It's been out for probably a couple years at this point. But before I get into Lando, I'm going to talk a little bit about a short time ago in a galaxy really, really close. Things that we might have done for local development. One of the methods, I don't know if any of you have seen this, I certainly have. Actually, still recently, I actually ran into one of these where the devs didn't do anything locally other than change code. They had a server that they'd upload to test any changes they made in-house. Basically a rack-mounted clone of their production server. And everybody would FTP into this thing or git pull down their changes manually. Problems with this, you're going to have people stepping on each other's toes and they're messing with the development server all at the same time if you've got a team. Obviously having a actual rack-mounted server is going to be expensive as can be. And then you might have had native solutions, like your LAMP, your WAMP, your MAMP setups. Basically, your laptop becomes the server. You install the same server software you would have on the server itself, but on your local machine. Works. Allows you to do it local. Problem is you can't change things easily. So you've got your whole server configuration essentially on your laptop. Not a quick, easy change. And then, each member of your team might have a slightly different config on their system, so you're not going to have consistency. Not something you want. And then there's integrated packages that make things a little bit easier. These kind of installed all your server software for you. I'm sure most of you have used these. Your XAMPP, your MAMP, WAMP stacks, Aqua Dev Desktop, just installs everything for you. You maybe, if you want to switch PHP versions, there could be an option. You don't have to fuss with much. But again, you can end up with a situation where each member of your team has a different configuration because they set it up themselves. And you can end up with problems that it worked on my machine. Why isn't it working on production or development server? Virtual machines. You can have multiple server instances on your machine, on your laptop. You can closely mimic your production because you can set up that virtual machine exactly the way your production server's set up. There's tools like Vagrant, Puppet, Ansible that you can make sharing your team, sharing the configuration with your team so you can get everybody kind of on the same page. Tools like Drupal VM set up some of this stuff for you. But this is kind of difficult to configure initially, and you tend to use a lot of resources, especially if you're spinning up more than one machine at a time. And then there's the latest and greatest containers, Docker being the most popular. Allows you to mix and match your services, your configuration. You can have multiple server instances up at a time, and you're only running within one VM, so you're not as resource intensive. Again, you can closely mimic your production. This is a cross-platform solution, so you can have the same stack for everybody on your team, regardless if they're on Linux, Windows, Mac. And you get tools like Docker Compose that can help you manage and share your configuration. But managing containers can get cumbersome. You've got to manage that Docker Compose file. You have to make these different containers work together. So it takes some time to get spun up. Which brings us to Lando. Lando is a free, open source, cross-platform local development and DevOps tool. It is a command line tool built on Docker technology. It is essentially a wrapper for your whole stack. So you install Lando, it will, for you, set up Docker and all of your dependencies for your project. All of the tools you use will be handled for you. So what can Lando do? It will easily mimic production locally. Through the various containers of Docker, it will build out your LAMP stack, for example. Your PHP Apache configuration, it does it for you. You can standardize your development environments and tooling across OS X, Windows, and Linux, so everybody on your team, regardless of what they're using, will essentially have the same development stack, and it will work the same for everybody. It integrates with hosting providers like Pantheon. One of the cool things with the Pantheon integration, it actually allows you to type in your command line a command like Lando pull. And you get a prompt that lets you download your files, download your latest database from the Pantheon environment right in your local. So it's just one less step to get started. You don't have to be importing databases and dealing with downloading the files and stuff. It just does it for you. You can store your configuration in a single version controlled file. So your whole team gets the whole configuration. It's in the repo with your project. And it's shareable for everybody. It also allows you to easily customize or extend your tooling, your deployment options, and basically any other functionality. I'll get into more of that in a minute. So Lando, the way it works, it gives you some pre-configured start states, which are essentially common sense defaults for the various environments. If you want to start with a Drupal 6 recipe, for example, it will build your whole stack for you. You'll have probably what, PHP 5 point something if you're running the Drupal 6 recipe, for example. It essentially builds the right versions of everything you're going to need based on these various tools or frameworks that you want to use. You can also roll your own and set up various base languages. These are the ones that are supported by default: PHP, Node, .NET, Python, Ruby, Go. Nope, I got a broken slide in here. So it's supposed to talk about services that you can install on your environment. Things like phpmyadmin or mailhog, or these pieces of software that you might want to have installed and use, you can just tell Lando, hey, install this for me, and it will do it for you. Here's an example configuration. This is the lando.yaml file. This contains all of your configuration for everything Lando. So if you want to, so this one, for example, I'll just go through it. The name of this site is Drupal test. Internally, Lando will build out all of your containers, use this Drupal test as the names of everything, and it will actually create for you a URL so you can access your site. It'll be drupaltest.lando.site. This one uses the Drupal 8 recipe, so it's going to pull in your whole PHP, your whole LAMP stack, essentially, with all the common configuration for Drupal 8 already done for you. This one, Drupal true, means it's going to install Drupal console for you, so you can type Lando Drupal, and it'll run Drupal console commands inside the container. And then we've got config. So webroot says, okay, your doc root is in a directory called doc root within your project, so it configures Apache to look there for your index. And here I've customized it. Okay, on production I'm using PHP 7.0, so I just say, okay, PHP 7.0. It'll install, configure that for you. Xdebug true, turns on xdebug, opens all the right ports, sets up Docker so that all you have to do is, if you're using my PHP storm, you just say, okay, start debugging, and it just works. Your services, like I mentioned earlier, mailhog, you just say, okay, services, I want to use mailhog, and I want to use, it's of type mailhog. You can name it whatever you want, but type is mailhog, so it will install the mailhog software for you to handle your email testing. And here at database, I customize it. Okay, I want MySQL 5.7, so I just define it there, and that's the version it will use. Oops. Also in this, that's kind of confusing. So proxy, I can say, all right, I want to customize that. Actually, should say mailhog, not phpmyadmin, but let's say I want to be able to access my mailhog tool. You access it in the browser, but I want to define the URL that's given to it. I want it to be mail.drupaltest.lando.site. I can just define here. I'd say proxy, I'd say mailhog, and then I just put in the address there, and Lando handles all the wiring, all the stuff within Docker to get that done for you. So it takes a lot of the hassle out of it. Lando also does some advanced tooling. So if you've got scripts or repetitive commands that you tend to run a lot within your project, you can define these within Lando so that they become actual Lando commands that you can now, they're in your Lando config, your whole team now can run these commands. This particular example, we're running, so this tooling there says, okay, we're defining our tooling. Install is the command, so I want to be able to type Lando install. I just say, okay, install, that's the name of the command. I describe it, and then I define what commands it runs. In this example, so I've got the app server, which would be like my LAMP, like my Apache server container, and then in this example, I have got also a node container. And by typing a single command, it will access these various containers. It'll say in the app server, okay, change directory to the Drupal directory and run composer install, and it'll run that. And as soon as it's done, it'll go into the node container and run yarn install for me. So it'll build all that for you. And in this one, okay, I rsync some things that were done on the node side over to the Drupal side. So in a single command, I've done all of my steps that I would need to build my project. And this is shareable with the team. It's just built into Lando once you define it. This one, the command is, these are just some examples that I've used in some projects recently. So this is the db reset command I set up. This one, it looks in the database container, it loads up the database container, and it searches the root directory of the project for either a .sql.zip or .sql.gz file. If it finds either, it assumes you've placed a backup of your database in there, and it imports it. And this SQL import's actually built into Drupal. This script, it'll actually wipe out your whole database and replace it with whatever you're importing. And that's actually a Lando command too. You can run manually without doing custom tooling. You can just say, okay, Lando db import, and then your file name, and it will import your whole database for you. You don't have to touch anything.
Just be aware that it drops all the tables.
It drops all, yes. It does have an option to...
There's a flag to turn it off.
Yeah.
It'll flush everything.
Right. Yeah, it's essentially if you're trying to reset the state of your environment and your database. But this one, okay, it imports your database, and then it flushes the caches, runs update db, and then does a config import, all these Drush commands. Everything you might just typically do after you do your database import, and it's just, it's just scripted for you, and it's a single command in Lando, which is great if you're working on a team that doesn't necessarily have the technical expertise and doesn't even necessarily run scripts much. To be able to have, or if you've got like a manager or something that it isn't particularly technical, but they want to be able to spin up a copy of your application on their machine, you can just ship them the Lando config and go, okay, say Lando start and then Lando install, and it will just do everything for them, and they'll be up and running. And they don't need to know how it works, it just does. Another example here. So if you want to do like this one, okay, deploy Drupal, you type Lando deploy Drupal, and it will kick off a script. So you've got your deployment script. What we used this for, it actually built, it ran some CI scripts, it did some like linting and such, and then it would do a build artifact of Drupal for us. So you don't need, to have a separate machine running doing your build artifacts. You can run it locally within Lando before you. In this one, we built, and then you just push up the artifact. And it would actually, this example, it asks you, okay, which environment, dev or stage? And it'll pass whatever you've selected to your script for you. And our script would then do the uploading and everything. And Lando allows you to manage your certificates and such. I don't have an example of that, but you can have all of your certs in there so that you can upload securely to your server without any additional steps. So here's an example of a decoupled Drupal setup, which is all the rage these days. So just the first part of the Lando config on this slide. So what we've done, our config says, okay, our web root, so our project directory structure, so we've got our project root. Inside that, we've got a Drupal directory. Inside that, it's got a web directory, so we're using probably the Drupal composer setup. And so that just tells Apache, okay, that's where everything is. It handles all the config for us. We're using Drupal console again. And actually, that's outdated. No, it's one of the later versions of Drupal. You no longer need to define where Drush is. It finds Drush in your vendor. It does it for you. So when you type Lando Drush, so you don't even have to have Drush installed on your local machine. It's in Lando. If it's in your project, it installs a global Drush, but if it's in your project, in your vendor, it'll find it and automatically map that for you. So anyways, the decoupled aspect, we've got essentially two applications. We've got a Drupal application, and in my example, I had a Gatsby application. And I want to be able to spin up both of those at the same time. I do it in Lando. Here I've defined, okay, I've got an nginx container. This is just the proxy, so these are just the URLs that I wanted. Lando will create these URLs for you. So when you spin up your application, if you don't define a URL, this is not something you have to do. It will just create it for you. It does all the hard stuff. But here I wanted to be specific. I wanted my one container, I wanted my nginx container to have a specific URL, and my Node.js container to also have a specific one. And then, okay, I define my services. I say, okay, the Node.js container is type Node 9, version 9. Overrides, so these are, you get common sense defaults for things out of the box. So you want to build a Node 9 container, it just does it for you with how you'd probably want it set up. But in my case, I wanted to override a couple of things. I wanted, because I'm using Gatsby, Gatsby uses port 8000 when you're doing the development. So I wanted just to expose port 8000. And I also wanted to set an environment variable. This is an environment variable inside the Node container so that when Gatsby's running, it can pick that up. And then globals, yeah, that just lets Gatsby know that it wants to install the latest version of Gatsby. And then for my tooling, I wanted to just pass through, so I've not really defined what these commands are. So npm node, these just exist in the Node container out of the box. So all I do is, okay, I want those to be exposed to my command line, so I don't have to SSH into the container to use them. I can just say now Lando npm or Lando node, and it'll just pass it through to the Node.js container for me. Gatsby command, the same thing. And then here's one where I want to actually define one. Oops. So I've got a command, Lando develop. It also runs within the Node.js container. It changes into the Gatsby directory inside my project directory and runs Gatsby develop, which is the command that Gatsby uses to do like live loading of your changes while you're working on the application. So rather than, okay, having to type Lando Gatsby develop, I just made a quick simple one. I just say Lando develop, and it spins up all the Gatsby stuff for me. Documentation. So Lando, if you go to docs.devwithlando.io, everything is documented. All the different services you can use, how to configure them, how to override everything. There's how-to videos there. It's a really great resource. Any question you have, it's almost always documented. Any problem you're going to have, it's almost always documented. It's very, very thorough documents for Lando. It's great. So, going to attempt a live demo here, which is generally frowned upon at these things, but well, I shouldn't say frowned upon, but okay. So okay, let's start. If I want to build a simple, I just want to get started, and I want to have a Drupal site. I want to get up and running here. Let's create a Drupal 8 project directory. And then I want my Lando config file. That's where we're going to start. So I just typed Lando init.
We can't see.
Oh, that stayed up there. Let's see. How do I end the presentation? All right, that works. So anyways, what I've done here, I just typed Lando init. I'm in the new Drupal 8 directory that I just created.
Still can't see.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, we got some.
There we go. Problem is when you practice this, I didn't plug into a projector, so I didn't know what that was going to do. So anyway, I'm in my Drupal 8 directory. I've typed Lando in it. It right away just asked me where's your code base. I can say okay, it's right here. So I've got a few options actually. I can say okay, I've actually got an existing project. It's in GitHub. So say you've already set up Lando and you've got your team. Somebody wants to get started. You go okay, just type Lando in it wherever you want to work from. And you select GitHub, so your project's there. You can actually set up your what do they call them? Your keys for your API keys, essentially.
Token.
What's that?
Access token.
Access token. So you set up your access token in GitHub, and you put it in in Lando, and now you can say okay. You select GitHub here, and then it asks you for the GitHub URL for the project. You put it in, it'll pull down your project automatically and spin up Lando based on the Lando config that exists there. Or if you're on Pantheon, similar thing. If you've already got it set up, it'll pull down everything you need from Pantheon. You just need your access keys. But in this case, we're starting from scratch. So I'm going to say, okay, current working directory. In my case, I want to use the Drupal 8 recipe, which gives us all our common sense defaults. Let's just say project root will be our web root, and our project name is Drupal 8. And so now what that will have done is, put on here. It's created our Lando YAML file. Very simple, very basic, but it's a good starting point, and it's enough to run Drupal 8. All you need is the name, the recipe, and where the files are. So now I can say, okay, Lando start. And so now what it's doing is building all the containers I need in Docker. So app server is my Apache server, database is my SQL server. It downloads these for me, sets them up. It's installing Drush because I chose the Drupal 8 recipe. It's just included. And then in this process, it'll also set up all the proxy stuff, so it'll create URLs. Like I said, you don't have to define them. It'll give us, in this case. So what it's done, okay, you can use localhost with the port number that it assigned, and it'll randomly assign a port number. It'll check to see if if it's an open port. And then what it does is it created this drupal8.lando.site URL for us. It also has its own certificate store, so you've got a certificate already built in and installed for your site with HTTPS there. And let's put Drupal in there. My original demo had, where I actually had pre-built a version that used Composer and pulled it in, but then I practiced it here this morning in the conference Wi-Fi. The Composer build took absolutely forever, so I'm just going to copy and paste here and put it all in there. While that's copying, I'll also show you I've got the decoupled setup that I was going through earlier. I've got that ready to go here, so I can just cd into that directory and say Lando start. And this is the one earlier where it had the Node.js container, it had the nginx container, all that configuration I showed you. And here it's just spinning it up. And it checks to make sure your containers actually came up and are up and running. It'll pull them. It'll try to restart them if it doesn't, if something fails. And there it went. I'm up and running. So I've already have installed on this the A1 CMS URL that I defined that points to my Drupal installation. So if I go there, I've got Drupal up and running. And then I can do my Lando. So here, I'll just show you. I've got, if I just type Lando, I've got all my commands listed and what they do. So these are built into Lando. I've got a composer. So Lando composer will just, this is part of the Drupal 8 recipe. It'll pass composer commands into the container for me. I mentioned the DB import earlier. You also have a DB export if you need to export your database. Just built in, it'll dump the file for you. You've got your other commands for doing things in Lando, but specifically we've got Lando develop, which is the one I created. Now it's just listed here as another command available to Lando. So when I type Lando develop, it's passed now. It'll say the Lando Gatsby, or it'll say Gatsby develop inside my node container, and run the Gatsby Gatsby's built-in develop setup. It's being kind of slow. So this is Gatsby's thing running here. Okay, so now it's actually running the Gatsby server. So I can go back to my Node.js URL here that I had defined. And there's my Gatsby demo up and running. And also my Drupal 8, I've got the files copied in there. I should see Drupal 8 installer come up here from that one. Bootstrapping Drupal for the first time here, so let's see. There we go, okay. There it is, and then from here, if I could add into my Lando config Drush commands to, maybe run this installer for me and set everything up. Yeah, I guess from there let's do questions. Anybody? Anything anybody else wants to know? Or all right, that'll be the end of it then. Thank you.